Hello, third graders. Today we get to start a new read aloud. The most of you, or the majority of you, voted for Pippi Longstockings by Astrid Lindgren. So that is what we will start today. I just wanted to give you a couple of fun facts about this book. Astrid is from Sweden, which is a country that I lived in and worked in after I graduated from college. And the original title in Swedish is Pippi Longstocking. And this book has been translated into 64 different languages, including English. And a fun fact about it is that Astrid came up with this idea when her 7-year-old daughter, Karen, was sick. And she had to stay in bed for a really long time. And she asked her mom to tell her a story. And this is the story that came out of that. Now, Astrid wrote it down and submitted it to become a book. And the publisher said, no, we're not interested. Then a couple of years later, there was a book contest for a children's book, and Astrid revised, just like we do as writers. She took some time to think about what she could make even better, and she entered it, and she won. And Pippi Longstocking, as we call it in English, has become one of the most famous, well-loved books for children in the world. So, with that background, we will start today. And I just wanted to remind you that it was kind of an inspiration for me that even in really tough times, like when someone is sick, kind of like we learned about several of the artists, really beautiful things and really amazing work can come out of that. So I found that really inspiring when we're in this tough time, when we're all staying at home. So, Pippi Longstocking by Astrid Lindgren. Way out at the end of a tiny little town was an old overgrown garden. And in the garden was an old house. And in the house lived Pippi Longstocking. She was 9 years old, and she lived there all alone. She had no mother and father. And that was, of course, very nice because there was no one to tell her to go to bed just when she was having the most fun, and no one who could make her take cod liver oil when she much preferred caramel candy. Pippi Longstocking by Astrid Lindgren. And there's also illustrations that I'll show you, and those are by Louis S. Glanzman. Here's our first illustration. Chapter 1. Pippi moves into Villa Kula. Way out at the end of a tiny little town was an overgrown garden, and in the garden was an old house. And in the house lived Pippi Longstocking. She was 9 years old, and she lived there all alone. She had no mother and no father, and that was, of course, very nice, because there was no one to tell her to go to bed just when she was having the most fun, and no one who could make her take cod liver oil when she much preferred caramel candy. Once upon a time, Pippi had had a father of whom she was extremely fond. Naturally, she had had a mother too, but that was so long ago that Pippi didn't remember her at all. Her mother had died when Pippi was just a tiny baby and lay in a cradle and howled so that nobody could go anywhere near her. Pippi was sure that her mother was now up in heaven, watching her little girl through a peephole in the sky, and Pippi often waved up at her and called, "Don't you worry about me, I'll always come out on top." Pippi had not forgotten her father. He was a sea captain who sailed on the great ocean, and Pippi had sailed with him in his ship until one day her father was blown overboard in a storm and disappeared. But Pippi was absolutely certain that he would come back. She would never believe that he had drowned. She was sure he had floated until he landed on an island inhabited by cannibals. And she thought he had become the king of all the cannibals and went around with a golden crown on his head all day long. "My papa is a cannibal king. It certainly isn't every child who has such a stylish papa," Pippi used to say with satisfaction. "And as soon as my papa has built himself a boat, he will come and get me, and I'll be a cannibal princess. Hi-ho, won't that be exciting?" Her father had bought the old house in the garden many years ago. He thought he would live there with Pippi when he grew old and couldn't sail the seas any longer. And then this annoying thing had to happen, that he was blown into the ocean, and while Pippi was waiting for him to come back, she went straight home to Villa Villacula. That was the name of her house. It stood there ready and waiting for her. One lovely summer evening, she had said goodbye to all the sailors on her father's boat. They were all fond of Pippi, and she of them. "So long, boys," she said, and kissed each one on the forehead. "Don't you worry about me. I'll always come out on top." Two things she took with her from the ship: a little monkey whose name was Mr. Nilsson. He was a present from her father, and a big suitcase full of gold pieces. The sailors stood upon the deck and watched as long as they could see her. She walked straight ahead without looking back at all, with Mr. Nilsson on her shoulder and her suitcase in her hand. "A remarkable child," said one of the sailors, as Pippi disappeared into the distance. He was right. Pippi was indeed a remarkable child. The most remarkable thing about her was that she was so strong. She was so very strong that in the whole wide world there was not a single police officer as strong as she. Why, she could lift a whole horse if she wanted to. And she wanted to. She had a horse of her own that she had bought with one of her many gold pieces the day she came home to Villacula. She had always longed for a horse, and now here he was, living on the porch. When Pippi wanted to drink her afternoon coffee there, she simply lifted him down into the garden. Beside Villacula was another garden and another house. In that house lived a father and a mother and two charming children, a boy and a girl. The boy's name was Tommy, and the girl's Annika. They were good, well brought up, and obedient children. Tommy would never think of biting his nails, and he always did exactly what his mother told him to do. Annika never fussed when she didn't get her own way, and she always looked pretty in her little well-ironed cotton dresses. She took the greatest care not to get them dirty. Tommy and Annika played nicely with each other in their garden, but they had often wished for a playmate. While Pippi was still sailing on the ocean with her father, they often used to hang over the fence and say to each other, "Isn't it silly that nobody ever moves into that house? Somebody ought to live there. Somebody with children." On that lovely summer evening, when Pippi, for the first time, stepped over the threshold of Villa Villacula, Tommy and Annika were not at home. They had gone to visit their grandmother for a week, and so they had no idea that anybody had moved into the house next door. On the first day after they came home again, they stood by the gate, looking out onto the street, and even then, they didn't know that there actually was a playmate so near. Just as they were standing there, considering what they should do and wondering whether anything exciting was likely to happen, or whether it was going to be one of those dull days when they couldn't think of anything to play, just then the gate of Villa Villacula opened and a little girl stepped out. She was the most remarkable girl Tommy and Annika had ever seen. She was Miss Pippi Longstocking out for her morning promenade. This is the way she looked. Her hair, the color of a carrot, was braided in two tight braids that stuck straight out. Her nose was the shape of a very small potato and was dotted all over with freckles. It must be admitted that the mouth under this nose was a very wide one, with strong white teeth. Her dress was rather unusual. Pippi herself had made it. She had meant it to be blue, but there wasn't quite enough blue cloth, so Pippi had sewed little red pieces on it here and there. On her long, thin legs, she wore a pair of long stockings, one brown and the other black. And she had on a pair of black shoes that were exactly twice as long as her feet. These shoes her father had bought for her in South America so that Pippi would have something to grow into, and she never wanted to wear others. But the thing that made Tommy and Annika open their eyes widest of all was the monkey sitting on the strange girl's shoulder. It was a little monkey, dressed in blue pants, yellow jacket, and a white straw hat. Pippi walked along the street with one foot on the sidewalk and the other in the gutter. Tommy and Annika watched as long as they could see her. In a little while she came back, and now she was walking backward. That was because she didn't want to turn around to get home. When she reached Tommy and Annika's gate, she stopped. The children looked at each other in silence. At last, Tommy spoke. "Why did you walk backward?" "Why did I walk backward?" said Pippi. "Isn't this a free country? Can't a person walk any way she wants to? For that matter, let me tell you that in Egypt everyone walks that way, and nobody thinks it's the least bit strange." "How do you know?" asked Tommy. "You've never been in Egypt, have you?" "I've never been in Egypt. Indeed, I have. That's one thing you can be sure of. I have been all over the world and seen many things stranger than people walking backward. I wonder what you would have said if I had come along walking on my hands the way they do in farthest India." "Now you must be lying," said Tommy. Pippi thought a moment. "You're right," she said sadly. "I am lying." "It's wicked to lie," said Annika, who had at last gathered up enough courage to speak. "Yes, it is very wicked to lie," said Pippi even more sadly. "But I forget it now and then. And how can you expect a little child whose mother is an angel and whose father is a king of a cannibal island and who herself has sailed on the ocean all her life, how can you expect her to tell the truth always? And for that matter," she continued, her whole freckled face lighting up, "let me tell you that in the Congo there is not a single person who tells the truth. They lie all day long. Begin at 7 in the morning and keep on till sundown. So if I should happen to lie now and then, you must try to excuse me and to remember that it's only because I stayed in the Congo a little too long. We can be friends anyway, can't we?" So that is where we'll stop. These chapters are a bit longer, so we won't read a full chapter every time. I'll try to keep the videos to about 15 minutes. But I hope you enjoyed this introduction to Pippi Longstocking, and I can't wait to read more with you.